As silver moonlight spills through crumbling archways, we begin our journey in a place where time itself seems to pause. Welcome to the ancient temple of Karnak in Egypt, where the stones remember secrets whispered 3,000 years ago. The air is cool against your skin as we pass beneath the great hypostyle hall, where 134 columns rise like a petrified forest toward the stars. Each column stands as tall as a 7-story building, their massive forms carved from sandstone that has witnessed empires rise and fall. The pharaohs who built this hall believed that these columns held up the very sky itself, a stone heaven pressing down upon the earth. Run your fingers along the hieroglyphs carved into the nearest pillar. These symbols aren't merely decorative, they are spells, carefully inscribed to protect the temple and grant the pharaoh eternal life. The ancient Egyptians believed that words had physical power, that by carving them into stone, they could make magic permanent and unbreakable. Every symbol you see is a prayer frozen in time. As we move deeper into the temple complex, notice how the moonlight catches on the walls, revealing layers of paint that have survived millennia. Originally, these halls were not the muted stone we see tonight. They blazed with color, brilliant blues made from crushed lapis lazuli, rich reds from iron oxide, and golds that seemed to capture the sun itself. The temples were meant to overwhelm the senses, to make mortals feel they had stepped into the realm of the gods. Listen, can you hear the echo of ancient footsteps? This sacred path we walk was called the Avenue of Sphinxes, and it once stretched nearly 2 miles, connecting Karnak to the Temple of Luxor. Over 1,300 Sphinx statues line this processional route, their lion bodies and ram heads watching silently as priests carried the statue of Ammonius Ra in his golden boat during the Opet festival. For 11 days each year, the entire city would transform into a celebration of divine renewal. We pause now beside the sacred lake, its waters still and black as obsidian under the moon. This rectangular pool was not for decoration, it served a profound spiritual purpose. Every morning before dawn, the priests would descend these very steps to purify themselves in water they believed was connected to the primordial ocean from which all creation emerged. They understood that to approach the divine, one must first wash away the dust of the mortal world. Look up at the obelisk rising before us, its granite surface catching starlight. This single pillar weighs over 300 tons and was carved from a quarry 500 miles away. The ancient engineers moved it here using only copper tools, wooden sledges, and the muscle power of thousands of workers. But here's what makes it truly remarkable. The Egyptians believed that obelisks were frozen rays of sunlight, that the pyramidal point at the top, called a pyramidion, was the first place Ra's light would touch each dawn, making it a meeting point between heaven and earth. The walls around us are covered with scenes of pharaohs making offerings to gods with animal heads and human bodies. But these images tell us something profound about ancient Egyptian philosophy. They didn't see the divine as separate from nature. By giving their gods the heads of falcons, crocodiles, and jackals, they were teaching that the sacred permeates all of creation, that divinity flows through every living thing. As we stand here in the moonlit silence, consider this. The Temple of Karnak was built and rebuilt over 2,000 years, with each pharaoh adding their own vision to the complex. It's not a single monument frozen in time, but rather a conversation between generations, each ruler leaving their mark, their prayers, their hopes carved into eternal stone. Some sought to be remembered. Others sought to speak to gods. All of them wanted to touch something greater than themselves. And so, under this ancient moon, surrounded by whispers carved in stone, we take our first steps into a night of forgotten temples and the timeless wisdom they hold. We leave Egypt now, as the moonlight guides us eastward, across deserts and mountains, to the mist-shrouded jungles of Cambodia, where the temple of Angkor Wat rises from the earth like a sacred mountain made manifest. The night air here is thick with humidity and the song of cicadas as we approach the western causeway. Notice how the temple faces west, toward the setting sun, an unusual choice that has puzzled scholars for centuries. Most Hindu temples face east to greet the dawn, but Angkor Wat was built as a temple to Vishnu, the preserver god, and some believe this Western orientation connects it to death and the afterlife, suggesting it was intended as a mausoleum for King Suryavarman II, the god-king who commissioned this wonder in the 12th century. As we cross the stone bridge over the moat, feel the vastness surrounding us. This moat is not merely decorative. It stretches over 3 miles in circumference and represents the cosmic ocean that, in Hindu cosmology, surrounds Mount Meru, the center of all physical and spiritual universes. The Khmer people who built Angkor Wat were creating nothing less than a map of the cosmos in stone and water, a place where heaven and earth could meet. Step carefully across these ancient stones, worn smooth by centuries of monsoon rains and pilgrims' feet. The entire temple complex covers more than 400 acres, making it the largest religious monument ever constructed by human hands. Yet it was built in just 35 years, a feat that required the labor of 300,000 workers and 6,000 elephants, moving over 5 million tons of sandstone blocks from quarries 30 miles away. Run your hand along the wall beside us, and feel the intricate carvings beneath your fingertips. Every surface of Angkor Wat is adorned with art. Over 3,000 apsaras, celestial dancers, grace these walls, no two exactly alike. Each dancing figure was carved with such delicate detail that you can see the individual fingers, the curve of a smile, the drape of silk that seems to move in an invisible breeze. The Khmer sculptors believed that beauty itself was a form of worship, that by creating something perfect, they could glimpse the divine. We enter now through the western gopura, the ornate gateway, and the temperature drops as stone walls shield us from the tropical night. In the darkness, we can barely make out the bas-reliefs that cover the gallery walls, scenes from Hindu epics stretching for over half a mile. During the day, these carvings tell stories, the churning of the ocean of milk, where gods and demons work together to create the elixir of immortality, the battle of Kurukshetra from the Mahabharata, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. But here's a secret these walls hold: the Khmer builders embedded precise astronomical knowledge into their design. The distances between certain galleries and the proportions of the towers correspond to the cycles of the yugas, the vast ages of Hindu cosmology. The temple itself is a calendar in stone, tracking not just days and seasons, but cosmic epics spanning millions of years. They built a monument that would outlast not just kingdoms, but entire cycles of creation and destruction. Climb with me now, carefully, up the steep stairs toward the central tower. These steps are deliberately narrow and precipitous, some rise at a 70-degree angle. The ancient architects designed them this way intentionally, forcing pilgrims to climb on hands and knees, heads bowed in humility as they ascend toward the realm of the gods. Every difficult step was meant to remind you that enlightenment requires effort, that the path to the divine is never easy. At the top, 5 lotus bud towers pierced the night sky, arranged in a quincunx pattern, 4 at the corners, 1 at the center. The central tower rises 213 feet above the jungle floor, and it represents Mount Meru itself, the Axis Mundi, the cosmic mountain at the center of existence. Standing here, you are standing at the spiritual center of the universe, the point where all worlds connect. Look out across the moonlit jungle stretching in every direction. At its height, Angkor was the largest pre-industrial city in the world, home to perhaps 1 million people, sustained by an ingenious system of reservoirs and canals that turned water management into both science and art. The Khmer people understood something profound, that civilization isn't built on conquest or gold, but on the patient mastery of nature's rhythms, on working with the earth rather than against it. But empires, like all things, are impermanent. By the 15th century, Angkor was largely abandoned, swallowed by the jungle that had always pressed at its edges. Trees grew through corridors where kings once walked. Roots cracked open walls that had stood for centuries. Nature reclaimed what humans had borrowed. And perhaps this too was part of the temple's teaching, that even the mightiest works of human hands eventually return to the earth, that permanence itself is an illusion. Yet here we stand, centuries later, walking through moonlight in a place that refuses to be forgotten. The stones still whisper their ancient wisdom to anyone patient enough to listen. The moon follows us to the Mediterranean. We have arrived at the Parthenon, crowning the Acropolis of Athens, where philosophy itself was born beneath these columns. Feel the warm stone beneath your feet, smoothed by 25 centuries of footsteps. This rocky outcrop rises nearly 500 feet above the city, and the ancient Greeks chose this high place deliberately, not just for defense, but because they believed that wisdom requires perspective, that to see clearly, one must rise above the chaos of everyday life and look down upon the world with clarity and distance. As we approach the temple, notice how even in ruin, even with its roof long gone and many columns toppled by time and war, the Parthenon still commands reverence. It was built in just 9 years, completed in 432 BCE under the guidance of the sculptor Phidias, and it represented the pinnacle of classical Greek architecture. But here's what makes it truly extraordinary. There is not a single straight line in the entire structure. Walk closer, and you'll see what seems impossible. The columns appear perfectly vertical, but each one actually tilts slightly inward. The base of the temple seems flat, but it curves upward at the center by nearly 3 inches. Even the columns themselves are not uniform cylinders. They swell slightly in the middle, a technique called entasis. The Greeks understood that the human eye plays tricks, that perfectly straight lines can appear to sag or bow. So they built subtle curves into everything, compensating for the imperfections of human perception to create the illusion of perfect geometry. They built a lie that revealed a deeper truth. Step between the columns now, into what remains of the inner chamber. This space once housed a statue of Athena, goddess of wisdom, that stood nearly 40 feet tall, covered in gold and ivory, her eyes made of precious gems that seemed to follow you as you moved. The Greeks spent more on this single statue than on the temple that housed it, because they understood that symbols have power, that the physical manifestation of an idea can change how people think and feel. But Athena was not just a goddess of war and wisdom, she was also the patron of craftspeople, weavers, and artists. The ancient Athenians believed that there was no separation between thinking and making, between philosophy and craft. To work with your hands skillfully was itself a form of wisdom, a way of understanding the world through action rather than just contemplation. Look up at the frieze that once ran around the temple's exterior, now mostly removed to museums, but still visible in fragments. It depicted the Panathenaic procession, the great festival held every 4 years when the entire city would climb this hill to present Athena with a new robe, woven by the women of Athens. What's remarkable is that this scene shows not gods or heroes, but ordinary citizens, young men on horseback, old men in conversation, girls carrying sacred vessels. The Greeks carved their own faces into their most sacred space, declaring that humanity itself was worthy of immortalization. This temple was built with the spoils of war, funded by tribute from Athens' empire, constructed during the Golden Age when Athens dominated the Greek world. Yet the philosopher Pericles, who oversaw its construction, said that they were building not for themselves, but for future generations, creating beauty that would outlast empires and speak to people who would live centuries after Athens had fallen. He was right, we are those future generations, walking through his dream-made stone. As we circle the temple, the moon casts shadows through the colonnade, and we can almost hear the echoes of ancient debates. Just down the hill from here, in the agora below, Socrates walked these streets asking uncomfortable questions, challenging people to examine their beliefs, to question everything they thought they knew. He was executed for it, sentenced to drink hemlock because the city feared his questions more than any sword. The Greeks invented democracy here, gathered an assembly to debate and vote, to argue passionately and then accept the will of the majority. But they also understood democracy's fragility, how easily it could slip into mob rule, how the voice of the crowd could be swayed by rhetoric rather than reason. They built this temple during democracy's triumph, but within a generation, Athens would fall, defeated by Sparta, its golden age ending in plague and war. Stand here in the moonlight and consider the paradox these stones embody. The Parthenon represents humanity's highest aspirations, the pursuit of beauty, the love of wisdom, the attempt to create something eternal in a world of change. Yet it was built by enslaved people, funded by imperial tribute, and dedicated to a goddess of war. Perfection and imperfection, glory and shame, all mixed together, impossible to separate. The temple has survived fire, explosion, and looting. In the 5th century, it became a Christian church. In the 15th, an Ottoman mosque. In 1687, Venetian artillery struck the gunpowder the Turks had stored inside, and the explosion tore out its heart. Yet still it stands, refusing to fall completely, refusing to release its hold on human imagination. Perhaps this is the Parthenon's deepest lesson, that beauty doesn't require perfection, that ruins can be more moving than intact monuments, that the scars of time tell their own story. The temple is more honest now in its brokenness, showing us that nothing lasts forever, but that even fragments can carry meaning, that even in decay, there is grace. As we prepare to leave this hilltop, take one last look at the city spreading below, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Athens is still here, still alive, still arguing and creating and questioning. The empire is gone, the goddess's statue is dust, but the questions the Greeks asked beneath these columns: how should we live? What is justice? What makes a life worth living? Those questions remain, eternal as the marble itself. The moon carries us now across continents and centuries, to the high peaks of the Andes, where the air grows thin and stars press close enough to touch. We arrive at Machu Picchu, the lost city of the Incas, perched between two mountain peaks, shrouded in silver mist. Listen to the silence here, it's profound, almost tangible, broken only by the whisper of wind through ancient stones. This citadel sits nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, built sometime around 1450 CE on a narrow ridge between two mountains the Incas considered sacred: Huayna Picchu, the young peak, and Machu Picchu, the old peak. The Incas didn't have a word for temple as we understand it. To them, the entire landscape was sacred, every mountain a deity, every spring a portal to the underworld. Walk carefully along these terraces, carved into the mountainside like steps for giants. The Incas built over 700 terraces here, each one preventing erosion, capturing rainfall, creating microclimates for different crops. But they weren't just farming, they were engaged in a philosophical practice. The Incas believed that agriculture was a form of reciprocity with the earth, a sacred exchange. They would speak to their crops, make offerings to the soil, because they understood that taking from the earth required giving something back. Notice how every stone fits perfectly against its neighbor, so precisely that you cannot slide a knife blade between them. The Incas accomplished this without mortar, without iron tools, without the wheel or written language. They used only stone hammers and bronze chisels, combined with an almost supernatural understanding of geology. They could read stone the way we read books, knowing exactly where to strike to make granite split along its natural grain. Some of these blocks weigh 50 tons, yet they fit together like a three-dimensional puzzle that has weathered 5 centuries of earthquakes without crumbling. Follow me now to the Intihuatana stone, the hitching post of the sun, rising from the highest point of the city. This carved granite pillar served as a precise astronomical instrument, casting shadows that marked the solstices and equinoxes with perfect accuracy. But it was more than a calendar. The Incas believed that at noon on certain sacred days, the sun would sit directly upon this stone, and in that moment, the barrier between the physical and spiritual worlds would dissolve. Priests would perform ceremonies here, symbolically tying the sun to the earth, ensuring it wouldn't drift away and leave the world in eternal darkness. The Spanish conquistadors destroyed nearly every Intihuatana stone they found, breaking the connection between the Incas and their celestial gods. But they never found Machu Picchu. This city remained hidden for centuries, protected by jungle and clouds, unknown to the outside world until 1911 when Hiram Bingham stumbled upon it, guided by local farmers who had always known it was there. Move with me through the Temple of the Three Windows, where trapezoidal openings frame the sacred mountains beyond. The Incas built all their doorways and windows in this distinctive shape, wider at the bottom than the top, because these structures could flex during earthquakes, the stones shifting and settling back into place without collapsing. They built for eternity, understanding that permanence isn't about rigidity but about flexibility, about knowing when to bend rather than break. Look closely at the stones around you, and you'll see that many are carved with symbols, waves representing water, steps representing the three levels of existence. The Incas believed in three realms: Hanan Pasha, the upper world of the sun and stars; Ke Pasha, this middle world where we live; and Uku Pasha, the inner world of the dead and unborn. These three worlds weren't separate, they interpenetrated, connected by sacred animals. The condor represented the heavens, the puma the earth, and the serpent the underworld. Together, they formed the Chicana, the Andean cross, a symbol of cosmic unity. We walk now past the Temple of the Condor, where natural rock formations were enhanced by human hands to create the shape of the sacred bird, its wings spread wide across the ground, its head rising from a carved altar. The Incas didn't distinguish between natural and human-made sacred spaces. They saw their architecture as a collaboration with the mountains themselves, revealing the divinity that was already present in the stone. Consider this: Machu Picchu was never a lost city to the indigenous people who lived in the sacred valley below. It was only lost to European consciousness, to the written historical record. For 4 centuries, local families knew about these ruins, some even living among them, tending crops on the ancient terraces. What does it mean for something to be discovered when people already knew it was there? The story of Machu Picchu reminds us that history itself is selective, that what we call discovery is often just one culture finally paying attention to what another has always known. Stand here at the edge of the citadel, looking down at the Urubamba River far below, snaking through the valley like a silver thread in the moonlight. The Incas called this the Wilcameyu, the sacred river, and they believed it was the earthly reflection of the Milky Way streaming across the sky. As above, so below, the cosmos mirrored in the landscape reflected in the heavens, everything connected in an endless web of correspondence. The Incas had no currency, no markets, no concept of private property as we understand it. Instead, they practiced sacred reciprocity, the understanding that everything you receive must be returned, that you are part of a network of mutual obligation extending from your neighbors to the mountains themselves. They wove their entire civilization around this principle, creating an empire that stretched 3,000 miles without the cohesive force of money, bound together instead by shared belief and ritual exchange. But empires built on faith are vulnerable when that faith is shattered. When the Spanish arrived with their guns and diseases, when they captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa and executed him despite receiving a room filled with gold as ransom, the entire cosmological order collapsed. How could the sun god allow his chosen representative to be murdered? How could reciprocity function when one side took everything and gave nothing back? Within a single generation, a civilization that had thrived for centuries was reduced to scattered survivors, their cities abandoned, their gold melted down, their sacred sites built over with Catholic churches. Yet Machu Picchu survived, hidden in clouds, waiting. And now we stand here under the same moon the Incas watched, walking paths they carved from living stone, surrounded by mountains they worshipped as gods. The city is empty of people, but full of presence, the accumulated prayers of generations, the careful attention of countless hands that placed each stone with reverence, the stubborn insistence of granite to endure long after the civilization that shaped it has passed into memory and myth. We travel now through time and mist, eastward across the Pacific, to the ancient forests of Japan, where moss-covered stones and twisted pines guide us to Ise Jingu, the grand shrine of Ise, oldest and most sacred of all Shinto sanctuaries. The path beneath our feet is raked gravel, white as bone in the moonlight, crunching softly with each step. We cross a wooden bridge over the Isuzu River, its waters running clear and cold from the mountains, and already you can feel that something is different here. The air itself seems to shimmer with intention, with centuries of devotion distilled into silence. But here is the great paradox of Ise, this ancient shrine is always new. Every 20 years, for the past 13 centuries, the Japanese have completely dismantled these buildings and rebuilt them on an adjacent plot, using the same techniques, the same materials, the same precise measurements that were used over 1,000 years ago. The shrine you see tonight was rebuilt in 2013. In 2033, it will be torn down and built again. Nothing here is more than 2 decades old, yet nothing here has changed in over a millennium. Consider what this means. The Shinto priests have performed this ritual rebuilding, called Shikinen Sengu, 63 times. Through wars and peace, through the rise and fall of shoguns and emperors, through earthquakes and tsunamis, through modernization and globalization, they have continued this practice without interruption. They have preserved not the buildings themselves, but the knowledge of how to build them, passing the craftsmanship from master to apprentice across 30 generations. The shrine is not the wood, it is the memory, the unbroken chain of human attention. Walk with me now toward the inner sanctum. Though we cannot approach too closely, the innermost shrine is forbidden to all but the imperial family and the highest priests. It sits behind 4 wooden fences, invisible, mysterious, containing what the Japanese believe to be the sacred mirror Yata no Kagami, one of the 3 imperial regalia that prove the emperor's divine descent from Amaterasu, the sun goddess. No one living has seen this mirror. No photographs exist. Some scholars even doubt it remains there. Yet millions of pilgrims come each year to stand before barriers that hide something they will never see, finding meaning in the act of reverence itself rather than in any visible reward. The buildings here are made entirely of Japanese cypress, hinoki wood, cut from trees in the surrounding forests that are hundreds of years old. But the Japanese have been planning even further ahead. They have been cultivating groves of cypress trees that won't be ready for harvest for another 200 years, ensuring that their descendants' will have the materials they need to continue this ancient practice. They are thinking in centuries, in the lifespan of forests, making promises to people who haven't been born yet. Notice the architecture, so simple it seems almost austere. Straight lines, natural wood, thatched roofs. No paint, no decoration, no ornamentation. The Japanese aesthetic principle of wabi-sabi finds its purest expression here: beauty in imperfection, in impermanence, in the honest expression of materials. The wood will weather, the thatch will fade, and that decay is not failure, it is truth. In 20 years, they will build again, and the cycle continues, like breath, like seasons, like the endless return of the sun. We pause before a simple wooden structure, no larger than a garden shed, yet it represents something profound. Shinto has no sacred texts, no commandments, no systematic theology. Instead, it teaches through place, through ritual, through the simple act of purification and gratitude. You cleanse your hands and mouth at the water basin. You bow twice, clap twice to wake the kami, the spirits that inhabit all things. You bow once more. The ritual is the teaching. Your body learns what your mind might struggle to articulate. The Japanese word kami is often translated as God or spirit, but it means something subtler. It is the quality of awe-inspiring presence that can inhabit anything: an ancient tree, a waterfall, a mountain, even a particularly beautiful stone. The world, according to Shinto belief, is alive with countless kami, 8 million at least, though the number is metaphorical, meaning simply infinite. Divinity is not concentrated in one distant heaven. It is distributed everywhere, in everything, waiting to be noticed by those who pay attention. Walk deeper into the sacred forest now, away from the main shrine. These cryptomeria trees, some over 1,000 years old, tower above us like the pillars of a cathedral that grew rather than was built. Their bark is rough beneath your fingertips, damp with moss and night air. The Japanese designated this entire forest as sacred centuries ago, protecting it from logging, from development, from the encroachment of modern life. They understood something we are only now beginning to relearn: that some places must remain untouched, that restraint itself can be a form of reverence. In the clearing ahead stands a smaller shrine, almost hidden among the trees. This is dedicated to Toyuk, goddess of agriculture and industry, provider of the sacred rice offered daily to Amaterasu. Even in their mythology, the Japanese recognize that spiritual matters cannot be separated from the practical realities of survival, that the goddess of the sun needs the goddess of grain, that transcendence requires sustenance, that we cannot contemplate the infinite on an empty stomach. The rebuilding of ISE costs hundreds of millions of yen, requires thousands of workers, demands years of preparation. Some have questioned whether Japan can afford to continue this tradition in an era of economic uncertainty. Yet the government and people continue to fund it, because they understand that a civilization is not measured only by its technology or its wealth, but by what it chooses to preserve, by the promises it keeps to the past and the future. There is a teaching here about impermanence and continuity, about how the two are not opposites but partners in a dance. The buildings at ISE are temporary, they last only 20 years. Yet the practice of building them is eternal, or as close to eternal as anything human can be. This is the middle way that Buddhism would recognize, the acknowledgement that yes, everything changes, everything ends, but within that flow of change, patterns can persist, Meanings can be maintained, connections can endure. As we prepare to leave this sacred forest, look back one more time at the simple wooden structures barely visible through the trees. In 2 decades, none of these specific buildings will exist. Yet ISE will still be here, rebuilt by hands that have not yet learned their craft, using wood from trees that are still growing, continuing a conversation between generations that began when Europe was in the Dark Ages and shows no sign of ending. The moon filters through the canopy above, dappling the path with silver light, and you realize that you are walking in 2 worlds at once, the physical forest around you, and the forest of time, where past and future grow together like intertwined roots beneath the soil, sustaining something that cannot be seen but can be felt, a presence as real as the ground beneath your feet. The moon guides us now across deserts and mountains, to the rose-red city carved from living stone. We arrive at Petra, in the heart of Jordan, where the Nabateans sculpted temples from the sandstone cliffs themselves, making architecture and geology inseparable. We approach through the Sick, a narrow gorge that winds through the rock like a secret passage into another world. The walls tower above us, sometimes 200 feet high, so close in places you could touch both sides at once. The moonlight barely penetrates here, filtering down as if through water, turning the rock faces blue and silver. Walk slowly, let your eyes adjust, let the stone walls embrace you as they embraced travelers and pilgrims for 2,000 years. The Nabateans were masters of water in a land where water meant survival. Look carefully at the walls of the Sick, and you can still see the channels they carved into the rock, an ingenious system of dams, cisterns, and ceramic pipes that captured every drop of rain from the surrounding mountains and channeled it into the city. They didn't just live in the desert, they transformed it, creating gardens and fountains in a place that should have been uninhabitable. They understood that true wealth isn't gold or armies, it's the knowledge of how to make life bloom where life should not exist. And now, as the Sick makes its final turn, the treasury appears before us, Al-Khazna in Arabic, emerging from the cliff face like a vision, like something too beautiful to be real. Even in moonlight, even after 2 millennia of weathering, it takes your breath away. The facade rises 130 feet high, carved entirely from the rose-colored sandstone, every column, every statue, every decorative urn sculpted by removing everything that was not the building, revealing the temple that was always hidden inside the mountain. But here is the beautiful irony. This monument called the treasury was never a treasury at all. It was a tomb, built in the 1st century CE for a Nabatean king whose name we no longer know. The Bedouin tribes who lived among these ruins centuries later saw the massive stone urn at the top of the facade and believed it held the pharaoh's treasure. They fired rifles at it, trying to shatter it and release the gold. You can still see the bullet marks scarring the stone. They never understood that the treasure had been invisible all along, not gold, but memory, not wealth, but wonder. Step closer to the facade, close enough to touch it. The stone is warm from the day's heat, releasing it slowly into the cool night air. Run your fingers across the surface and feel the chisel marks, still visible after 2,000 years, the signature of hands that shaped this stone, craftsmen whose names are lost but whose work outlasted empires. The Nabateans carved this entire facade from the top down, standing on scaffolding that has long since crumbled to dust, working with bronze tools and infinite patience to create something that would speak across centuries. The color of the stone shifts constantly as clouds pass over the moon, from pink to red to deep burgundy, sometimes gold, sometimes purple. The Nabateans chose this cliff for its beauty, understanding that a temple must move the soul before it can elevate the spirit. They didn't paint their monuments, they revealed the color already present in the earth, letting the stone itself be the art. Beyond the treasury, the city opens up into a vast necropolis of carved facades, over 800 tombs cut into the canyon walls. Walk with me through this city of the dead, where every cliff face becomes a doorway into stone. Some tombs are simple caves. Others rival the treasury in grandeur, with their Assyrian crenellations, Hellenistic columns, and Egyptian obelisks, an architectural fusion that tells the story of Petra's position at the crossroads of the ancient world. For 6 centuries, Petra thrived as the capital of the Nabatean kingdom, controlling the trade routes that brought frankincense from Arabia, silk from China, spices from India, and ideas from everywhere. Caravans would arrive with camels loaded with goods worth fortunes, and the Nabateans would tax them, protect them, provide them with water and shelter. They grew wealthy not through conquest but through hospitality, understanding that in the desert, the person who controls water and provides safety becomes indispensable. Climb with me now, up the worn stone steps toward the monastery, Ad-Dair, even more massive than the treasury, its facade 160 feet wide, carved into the mountaintop itself. The climb is steep, over 800 steps carved into the rock, but the ancient pilgrims made this journey seeking something beyond the physical. With each step, the city falls away below, the world grows smaller, and the sky expands until you feel suspended between earth and heaven. The monastery rises before us, overwhelming in its scale, impossible in its ambition. Inside, the carved chamber is simple, almost empty, a single altar, a room for echoes and silence. The Nabateans dedicated this space to their deified king Obote-Zai, but later, Christian hermits lived here, carving crosses into the walls, adding their prayers to the layered history of faith that soaks into these stones. One sacred space becomes another, the divine accommodates itself to whatever name we give it. Stand at the edge of the cliff, looking out over the desert stretching endlessly under the moon, and consider Petra's greatest mystery, why it was abandoned. By the 4th century CE, the city was largely empty, left to the Bedouins and the silence. Some say trade routes shifted. Some say earthquakes made water systems fail. Some say the desert simply reclaimed what the desert had always owned. But perhaps there is another lesson here, that even the most impressive works, even cities carved from immortal stone, eventually return to silence, and that silence is not failure but transformation. The Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt rediscovered Petra in 1812, disguising himself as an Arab merchant to convince his Bedouin guide to show him the ancient ruins he had heard whispered about. For 1,000 years, Petra had been hidden from Western eyes, known only to local tribes who sheltered among the tombs and told stories of jinn haunting the carved facades. What does it mean to rediscover something that was never truly lost? Perhaps it means that places, like ideas, can sleep and wake, can fade from one culture's consciousness and persist in another's memory, waiting for the moment when the world is ready to see them again. Look at the stars above us now, impossibly bright in the desert darkness. The Nabateans were accomplished astronomers, aligning some of their monuments to track the solstices, using the predictable movements of celestial bodies to organize their earthbound lives. They understood that patterns exist in chaos, that by watching and waiting and recording what we see, we can find meaning in the seeming randomness of existence. As we begin our descent back into the city, back through the carved facades and empty tombs, remember that Petra means rock in Greek, the most literal name imaginable. Yet this rock is anything but simple. It holds water and releases it. It accepts the chisel and becomes art. It endures wind and time and somehow remains beautiful. The Nabateans didn't build on the rock or with the rock, they revealed the temples that were always sleeping inside it, waiting for human hands to wake them into form. And so we leave Petra as the moon reaches its apex, casting everything into stark relief, light and shadow, presence and absence, what endures and what fades. The stones will be here long after we are gone, still rose-red in the dawn, still silent, still holding their secrets close. We journey now through the moonlit night, traveling northward across seas and time, to the windswept shores of Scotland, where standing stones older than writing circle the earth like ancient witnesses. We arrive at the Ring of Brodger, in the Orkney Islands, where our ancestors gathered 5,000 years ago for reasons we can only dream about. Feel the wind here, it never stops, sweeping across these northern islands with a force that bends the grass and stings your face with salt from the surrounding sea. Yet these stones stand unmoved, 60 of them originally, 27 still standing, each one a silent giant reaching toward the sky. They form a perfect circle 340 feet across, positioned on a narrow strip of land between two lochs that gleam like mirrors of obsidian under the moon. These stones were raised during the Neolithic period, around 2500 BCE, making them older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than writing itself. The people who built this circle left no written records, no explanation of purpose, no instructions for their descendants. They left only stones, and the stones remember what words never recorded. Somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 hours of human labor went into quarrying, shaping, and erecting these megaliths, all without metal tools, without wheels, without any technology we would recognize. What could have motivated such effort? What belief could inspire people to move mountains, stone by stone? Walk the circumference of the circle with me now, feeling the presence of each standing stone as we pass. Some tower 15 feet high, weighing many tons, their surfaces rough and weathered by 5 millennia of northern storms. Notice how no two are exactly alike, each carries its own character, its own personality carved by time and wind. The people who placed them here chose stones from different quarries miles away, selecting each one with intention we can no longer fathom. Look closely at the surface of this nearest stone, and you'll see something remarkable. Carved into the weathered surface are runes and inscriptions left by Vikings who came here over 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years after the circle was built. Even to the Norse raiders, These stones were ancient beyond comprehension, mysterious enough that they felt compelled to add their own marks, their own prayers, perhaps hoping to tap into whatever power slept in these prehistoric monuments. Layer upon layer of human longing, carved into patient stone. Stand now at the center of the circle, at the heart of this sacred geometry. On the summer solstice, the sun rises directly in line with certain stones. On the winter solstice, it sets in alignment with others. But the Ring of Brodger is more than an astronomical calendar, it's a horizon observatory, designed to track the 18.6-year cycle of the moon's rising and setting positions, a cycle so subtle it requires generations of careful observation to detect. Our Neolithic ancestors were watching the sky with such dedication, such precision, that they could predict celestial events decades in advance. They were astronomers before astronomy had a name. But these stones served purposes beyond tracking time. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that Brodger was part of a vast ritual landscape stretching across these islands, connected by ancient pathways to other stone circles, burial mounds, and sacred sites. The people would process from monument to monument, performing ceremonies that took days or weeks, weaving together the living and the dead, the earth and the sky, into a cosmology we can barely glimpse through the fog of 5,000 years. Listen to the wind whistling through the spaces between the stones. It creates harmonics, resonances that change as you move around the circle. Some researchers believe the stones were positioned to create acoustic effects, that ceremonies here would have involved chanting or drumming amplified by the megaliths themselves, turning the entire circle into a musical instrument, a stone orchestra playing for the gods or the ancestors, or perhaps just for the pure joy of making the earth sing. Walk with me now toward the ditch that surrounds the circle, 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide. Carved by hand through solid bedrock using only antler picks and stone hammers. The effort required to excavate this ditch staggers the imagination, thousands upon thousands of hours of backbreaking labor, removing over 13,000 cubic yards of rock and soil. They created a boundary, a threshold between the sacred and the mundane, and that boundary itself became part of the ritual, a reminder that to enter holy ground, one must cross from one world into another. The moon is high now, and its light transforms the standing stones into a forest of shadows. It's easy, in this moment, to understand why ancient peoples worshipped in circles. The shape has no beginning and no end. Like the cycle of seasons, like birth and death and rebirth, like the eternal return of sun and moon across the sky. The circle is unity, completion, the snake swallowing its own tail, time folding back upon itself. Consider this profound truth. When these stones were raised, Britain was still connected to continental Europe by a land bridge. The climate was warmer. The landscape was covered in forests that have long since vanished. The people who built Brodger were farmers, but only recently, their grandparents had been hunter-gatherers, roaming freely, owning nothing, bound to no place. In erecting these permanent monuments, they were making a revolutionary statement. We belong here. This land is ours, we will be remembered. They were inventing the very concept of heritage, of leaving a legacy in stone that would outlast flesh and memory. Yet we know almost nothing about them, not their language, not their gods' names, not their music or poetry or dreams. They are gone so completely that even their bones have mostly dissolved into the acidic Orkney soil. But the stones remain, and in their remaining, they pose an eternal question: what will we leave behind? What will speak for us when our voices have fallen silent? Stand at the edge of the circle now, looking back toward the center, and notice how the stones frame the landscape. Here, a distant hill crowned with a burial mound; there, a glimpse of the sea; above, the vast northern sky where auroras sometimes dance in green curtains of light. The Ring of Brodger doesn't just sit in the landscape, it organizes it, makes sense of it, turns random geography into sacred cosmology. The stones teach us how to see. In the 19th century, farmers tried to break up some of the fallen stones to use as building material for walls and cottages. But local legend held that anyone who disturbed the stones would be cursed, would suffer misfortune that would haunt generations. Whether from superstition or wisdom, most stones were left alone, and now they are protected by law, recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, their preservation guaranteed by modern society honoring ancient mysteries we cannot solve. The wind picks up now, carrying with it the scent of heather and salt water, the timeless smells of these northern islands where land and sea wage their eternal war for territory. The stones stand impassive, having witnessed this battle for 5,000 years, knowing they will witness it for 5,000 more, long after we have added our own brief scratches to the palimpsest of history. As we prepare to leave this ancient circle, take one last look at the stones silhouetted against the star-filled sky. They look almost like a gathering of cloaked figures, frozen in the midst of some eternal ritual, waiting patiently for us to remember what they mean, what they were, what they tried to tell us about ourselves. Perhaps that is their purpose, not to give answers, but to make us ask questions, to remind us that mystery itself is sacred, that not everything can or should be explained. The moon guides us southward now, across oceans and equator, to the dense jungles of Central America, where howler monkeys call in the darkness and mist rises from ancient plazas. We arrive at Tikal, crown jewel of the Maya civilization, where pyramids pierce the jungle canopy like stone fingers reaching toward the stars. The night air here is thick and alive, humming with insects, rustling with unseen creatures moving through the understory. We walk along an ancient causeway, raised above the forest floor, following the same path that Maya priests walked over 1,000 years ago. Feel the worn limestone beneath your feet, smoothed by countless footsteps, and know that you are walking through time itself. Before us, Temple 4 rises from the jungle like a sacred mountain, 212 feet high, making it the tallest pre-Columbian structure in the Americas. Climb with me now, carefully, up the wooden stairs modern archaeologists have built alongside the ancient stone steps that are too worn and treacherous to use. With each step upward, the sounds of the jungle floor fade, replaced by the whisper of wind through leaves. The Maya built their temples as cosmic mountains, artificial peaks that brought humans closer to Xibalba, the sky realm where gods dwelt among the stars. From the top, the view is breathtaking. The jungle stretches endlessly in every direction, a sea of green turned silver by moonlight, and rising from this ocean-like islands are the other great temples of Tikal, Temple I, the Temple of the Great Jaguar, Temple II, the Temple of the Mask, Temple 3, still half buried in vegetation, waiting for excavation. The Maya didn't just build in the jungle, they built with it, understanding that stone and forest were partners in creating sacred space. What's remarkable about Tikal is its scale. At its height, around 700 CE, this city was home to perhaps 90,000 people, making it one of the largest urban centers in the world at that time. The Maya built over 3,000 structures here: temples, palaces, ball courts, causeways, residences. They created a metropolis in one of the most challenging environments on Earth, where rainfall is seasonal, soil is thin, and the jungle constantly tries to reclaim every cleared space. Yet they thrived here for over 1,000 years. Descend with me now, back into the Great Plaza, where Temple I and Temple II face each other across the ancient square. Temple I was built as a tomb for Jasa Chan Kawili, one of Tikal's greatest rulers, who died in 734 CE. The temple rises 154 feet high, its 9 tiers representing the 9 levels of Xibalba, the Maya underworld. His body was placed in a burial chamber deep within the pyramid, surrounded by jade, pottery, and precious offerings meant to sustain him on his journey through the afterlife. But here's what makes this profound: the Maya didn't see death as an ending. They believed the soul underwent a dangerous journey through Xibalba, facing trials and trickster gods, navigating rivers of blood and houses filled with jaguars and bats. Only by passing these tests could the soul be reborn, emerging from the underworld to take its place among the stars or return to the earth in a new form. Death was transformation, a painful metamorphosis from one state of being to another. Look up at the decorative cone that crowns Temple I, a massive wall of carved stone that once bore the painted image of Jasa Chan Kawili seated upon a jaguar throne. The paint has long since faded, but you can still see the shape of it in moonlight: a king transformed into a god, a man who became a constellation. The Maya understood that memory itself is a form of immortality, that a name spoken aloud brings the dead back to life, if only for a moment. Walk with me now to the ball court, where the Maya played a game that was more sacred ritual than sport. The game involved keeping a heavy rubber ball, sometimes weighing 8 pounds, in motion without using hands or feet, striking it only with hips, elbows, and knees. The ball represented the sun moving through the sky, and the court itself was the underworld through which the sun traveled each night. To play the game was to reenact cosmic battles between light and darkness, order and chaos. But the stakes were more than symbolic. Scholars still debate what happened to the losing team. Some evidence suggests players were sacrificed, their blood offered to sustain the gods and keep the universe in motion. Other evidence suggests only the team captain died, or that prisoners of war were forced to play knowing they would not survive defeat. What's certain is that the Maya believed sacrifice was necessary, that the gods had shed their own blood to create humanity, and humans must reciprocate to maintain the cosmic balance. The universe ran on exchange, on reciprocity, on blood and prayer and offerings given freely. Notice the stone markers at either end of the court, carved with hieroglyphs we can now read. The Maya had a fully developed writing system, one of only 5 independently invented in human history. For over a century after the Spanish conquest, no one could read these glyphs. The knowledge was lost, deliberately destroyed by conquistadors and priests who saw Maya books as works of the devil and burned them by the thousands. Only 4 Maya codices survived, 4 books from a civilization that produced libraries. The rest is silence, knowledge turned to ash. But in the 1950s and 60s, scholars finally cracked the code, and suddenly the stones began to speak. The glyphs told stories of kings and dynasties, of wars and alliances, of astronomical observations and ritual calendars. We learned that the Maya had calculated the length of the solar year to within seconds of our modern measurements. They had predicted eclipses centuries in advance. They had developed the mathematical concept of zero, one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements, and used it to count backward and forward through time spans of millions of years. Stand here in the Great Plaza, where ceremonies once drew thousands of spectators, where incense smoke rose thick enough to veil the sun, where the sound of drums and shell trumpets echoed off stone walls. Try to imagine it as it was, every surface painted brilliant red, blue, green, and yellow, enormous textile banners hanging from the temples, the plaza packed with people wearing jade jewelry and elaborate feathered headdresses, the king appearing at the top of Temple I like a god descending from heaven, his body covered in jade plaques that clicked together as he moved, making him sound like rain. But by 900 CE, Tikal was abandoned. The plazas stood empty. The temples were slowly swallowed by jungle. Trees grew from the tops of pyramids, their roots cracking stone. The forest reclaimed what had been cleared. For over 1,000 years, Tikal was lost to the outside world, known only to local people who told stories of a ghost city hidden in the trees, guarded by spirits and jaguars. What caused the collapse? Scholars debate this still, perhaps drought, perhaps warfare, perhaps environmental degradation from deforestation and erosion. Tikal's population had grown so large that they had cleared vast areas of jungle for farmland, disrupting the water cycle, turning productive land into barren clay. Perhaps they learned too late that civilizations cannot endure by consuming their environment faster than it can regenerate. Perhaps the lesson applies to us as well. Walk to the edge of the plaza, where jungle begins again, where roots push up through ancient paving stones and vines climb pyramid sides. Notice how nature doesn't destroy the temples but embraces them, incorporating them into the forest's architecture. Trees grow from courtyards. Moss covers glyphs. Roots follow the lines of ancient walls underground. The boundary between human-made and natural becomes impossible to distinguish. This is the paradox of Tikal. It is both monument and warning, both testimony to human ambition and reminder of human limits. The Maya built for eternity, and their works endure. But the civilization that built them did not, could not, in the end, sustain itself. The stones remain, asking us the same question they asked their creators. What does it profit us to build monuments that outlast the cultures that gave them meaning? Yet standing here under the moon, surrounded by temples rising from the forest floor, you feel not despair but wonder. These stones speak of people who looked at the stars and saw patterns, who looked at time and learned to measure it, who looked at the jungle and said, "Here we will build a city." They failed, yes, but magnificently. They reached for something greater than themselves, and though their hands have turned to dust, the reaching itself remains, carved into stone that refuses to forget. Our final journey carries us across continents one last time, to the mystical highlands of Tibet, where the air is so thin that breathing becomes meditation, and mountains brush against the sky. We arrive at Padala Palace in Lhasa, perched on Red Mountain, 13,000 feet above sea level, where earth and heaven have always been closer than anywhere else on earth. The palace rises before us like a vision from a dream, 13 stories of white and red walls climbing the mountainside, over 1,000 rooms stacked upon each other, golden roofs gleaming under the moon like captured starlight. This was the winter residence of the Dalai Lamas for over 3 centuries, built and rebuilt beginning in the 17th century on foundations that date back to the 7th century, when King Sonsan Gampo first raised a fortress on this sacred hill. Climb with me now up the countless stone steps. Local tradition says there are 999, though no 2 people ever seem to count the same number. Perhaps that's intentional, a reminder that the path to enlightenment cannot be measured in ordinary ways. The steps are worn smooth by millions of pilgrims who have made this ascent over centuries, each one seeking something: blessing, wisdom, peace, or simply the merit that comes from honoring the sacred. The Padala Palace is more than a building, it's a 3-dimensional mandala, an architectural representation of Buddhist cosmology made manifest in stone and timber. The white walls represent compassion, the red walls represent wisdom, and the golden roofs symbolize enlightenment itself. To walk through the palace is to journey through the stages of spiritual awakening, each level bringing you closer to understanding, closer to liberation from suffering. Enter with me now into the Red Palace, the sacred heart of the complex, where chapels and meditation halls are stacked one atop another like layers of consciousness. The air inside is thick with the scent of juniper incense and yak butter lamps, thousands of them burning continuously, their flickering light creating shadows that dance across walls covered in ancient murals. These paintings depict the life of Buddha, the history of Tibet, the countless manifestations of bodhisattvas who delayed their own enlightenment to help others find the path. Notice the treasures housed here, statues of Buddha made from solid gold encrusted with turquoise and coral, Thangka paintings so intricate that a single one might take years to complete, ancient manuscripts written on palm leaves in Sanskrit and Tibetan, their pages illuminated with gold leaf and precious pigments. But the true treasure of Padala is not material, it's the accumulated prayers of generations, the devotion of countless monks who spent their lives in meditation within these walls, the intention that soaks into the very stones. Walk carefully through the hall containing the stupas, the funeral monuments of past Dalai Lamas. The stupa of the 5th Dalai Lama stands nearly 50 feet high, covered in over 8,000 pounds of gold, studded with diamonds, pearls, and precious stones beyond counting. But more valuable than the gold is what the stupa represents, the belief that consciousness doesn't end at death, that the Dalai Lama is reborn again and again, recognized as a child and brought here to continue his eternal work of teaching compassion to a suffering world. The current Dalai Lama, the 14th, fled Tibet in 1959, escaping Chinese occupation by crossing the Himalayas on foot in a journey that nearly killed him. He has never returned. The Potala Palace stands now as a museum, a monument to a way of life that has been violently interrupted but not erased. Pilgrims still come, still circle the building clockwise, still spin prayer wheels and prostrate themselves before the gates. The prayers continue, even when the ones who prayed them are gone. Stand now at one of the high windows, looking out over Lhasa spread below, the Himalayan peaks rising in the distance like a wall between earth and sky. The Tibetans call their land the roof of the world, and from here, you can understand why. The mountains are so vast, so overwhelming, that they force a kind of humility, a recognition that human life is brief and small against such eternal grandeur. Perhaps that's why Buddhism found such fertile ground here, in a land where nature itself preaches impermanence. The Dharma's teachings about suffering and letting go feel not like philosophy but like simple observation. The Potala Palace was built to last forever, with walls 16 feet thick at the base, tapering as they rise. Earthquake-resistant construction developed over centuries of hard experience. Yet the Tibetans who built it understood something paradoxical, that even the most solid structures are impermanent, that everything constructed will eventually crumble, that attachment to permanence is itself the source of suffering. They built for eternity while knowing eternity doesn't exist, and in that contradiction lies profound wisdom. Voice becomes softer, more reflective, beginning to weave together the entire journey. And now, as our journey through the night reaches its end, as the moon begins to set and the first hint of dawn touches the eastern horizon, let us remember all the places we have walked together beneath the stars. We began in Egypt, in Karnak's hypostyle hall, where columns held up the sky and hieroglyphs were spells carved into stone, where the priests understood that words could become magic if etched deeply enough. We learned that temples were painted in brilliant colors, that the sacred was meant to overwhelm the senses, and that building for future generations was itself an act of faith. We traveled to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat rising from the jungle, where every stone told a story and beauty itself was worship. We climbed steep stairs on hands and knees, learning that enlightenment requires effort, and we stood atop towers that mapped the universe itself in stone and geometry, where earthly rivers reflected celestial pathways. We ascended to Athens, to the Parthenon where philosophy was born, where the Greeks built curves into straight lines to compensate for the imperfections of human perception. We learned that ruins can be more honest than intact monuments, that democracy is fragile, and that the questions posed in ancient times, how should we live? What is justice? Remain eternally unanswered and eternally necessary. We climbed to Machu Picchu, where the Incas practiced Aini, sacred reciprocity, where stone fit against stone without mortar, where temples were built not on mountains but as mountains. We learned that agriculture can be prayer, that flexibility ensures survival better than rigidity, and that what seems lost to history is often only lost to those who stopped paying attention. We walked through Ise Jingu, where the ancient shrine is rebuilt every 20 years, teaching us that permanence lives not in objects but in knowledge, not in buildings but in the unbroken chain of human attention passing wisdom from one generation to the next. We learn that impermanence and continuity are partners, that everything changes yet patterns persist. We stood in Petra's rose-red treasury, carved entirely from living cliff face, where the Nabateans mastered water in the desert and understood that true wealth is the knowledge of making life bloom where it should not exist. We learn that the greatest monuments are often revelations rather than constructions, exposing the beauty already sleeping inside stone. We circled the Ring of Brodger, older than writing, where our Neolithic ancestors moved megaliths to track the moon's 18-year cycle, creating acoustic spaces and sacred boundaries carved from bedrock with only antler and stone. We learn that mystery itself is sacred, that not everything can or should be explained, and that the questions we leave for the future matter more than the answers we preserve from the past. We explored Tikal, where Maya pyramids pierced the jungle canopy, where kings became gods and ball games reenacted cosmic battles. We learned that civilizations can fall even as their monuments endure, that hubris and ambition build both wonders and warnings, and that nature doesn't destroy what we abandon, it embraces it, incorporating human dreams back into the forest's patient architecture. And finally, here in Tibet, at Potala Palace perched between earth and sky, we learn that the most solid structures acknowledge their own impermanence, that consciousness might outlast stone, and that building for eternity while knowing eternity doesn't exist contains a wisdom beyond architecture. Voice becomes even softer, more intimate. What connects all these places? What common thread runs through temples separated by continents and millennia, built by people who never knew each other existed? Perhaps it's this: humanity's eternal desire to touch something greater than ourselves, to leave marks that outlast our brief lives, to create beauty that speaks across the silence of centuries. We build in stone because stone remembers. We carve our prayers into mountains because mountains witness ages we cannot comprehend. We create sacred spaces because we need places where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, where the barrier between human and divine grows thin enough to cross. Every temple we visited tonight taught the same lesson in different languages, that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that our individual lives connect to vast chains of cause and effect stretching backward to the first humans who looked at stars and forward to descendants we will never meet. The temples are nodes in a network of meaning, each one a voice in a conversation that began before history and continues beyond our sight. As dawn approaches and moonlight fades, as our nocturnal journey ends and we prepare to return to our ordinary world, carry this with you: the temples are not dead. They are not merely ruins or tourist attractions or archaeological sites. They are alive with accumulated intention, glowing with the prayers and labor and dreams of countless generations. When you touch their stones, you touch every hand that shaped them. When you walk their paths, you join a procession that includes pharaohs and priests, philosophers and pilgrims, everyone who ever looked at stone and sky and asked, "What does it all mean?" The answer, if there is one, lives not in any single temple but in the fact that we keep building them, keep visiting them, keep asking the questions they pose. We are the latest chapter in a story that began when the first humans stacked one stone upon another and called it sacred. We will not be the last. The moon sets. The stars fade. Dawn breaks over temples scattered across the earth, touching each one with new light: Karnak, Angkor Wat, the Parthenon, Machu Picchu, Ise, Petra, Brodger, Tikal, Potala, monuments to our endless reaching, Our stubborn hope that meaning can be made permanent, that beauty can outlast empires, that love carved into stone becomes, in some small way, eternal. Rest now. The temples will still be there when you wake, patient as ever, waiting to whisper their ancient secrets to anyone who takes the time to listen.